Jefferson Educationals. Hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society. Big thanks to those of you who are joining us at home. We announced earlier today on Thursday, March 12th, that we have suspended our live audience in-person public events effective immediately as we continue to monitor the coronavirus COVID-19 situation as that develops. We do want to continue doing our programming here to continue serving the community as we have for more than the past 10 years. So we're making a move here. And so tonight is the first time we will offer digital programming at the Jefferson. It's something that our team is excited to offer, and we're excited for you to be along for the ride for that. We welcome all of your feedback, of course, in the comments section, how we can get better, how we can improve. And of course, if you have a question for tonight's presenter, we ask you to leave it in the comments section below as well. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Continuing tonight, though, we are focused on the history of Erie County's responsibility from the poor. And we'll learn from scholar in residence here, Dr. Judy Lynch. But I do want to announce that this change in programming will be ongoing for the foreseeable future as we continue to monitor the situation, as we take advice and recommendation from officials at both the local and state levels, guiding us in making responsible decisions for the public. If you have questions, comments, concerns, we always do encourage you to reach out to us at the Jefferson. Give us a call at 814-459-8000. In fact, we put that phone number in the comments section below to contact us. I do want to let you know that we do have a special program happening tomorrow night. That'll be at 6 o'clock. That program is going to feature representatives from the Erie County Health Department as well as medical professionals from the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine talking about COVID-19, a community conversation. We'll be here to learn more about that and what we should do as the Erie County region as we move forward. We welcome you to tune back in on our Facebook page for that live event at 6 o'clock tomorrow. That's Friday, March 13th. Friendly reminder, we do have some satellite programming coming up as well. We are suspending the live programming for that. We will have Facebook Live events for those as well. That includes programming next week on Wednesday and Thursday, as well as the following week on Monday and Tuesday. All of that information is online at our website, jeserie.org. And of course, again, you can always call us at 814-459-8000. We appreciate you adapting with us as we adapt to the times, and we continue to have programming here at the Jefferson that we know is meaningful to the community and something that you look forward to and we look forward to as well. Again, this is our first program, so bear with us as we work out the kinks and we get better along the way. I can't think of a better person to help represent the Jefferson as we do move forward as one of our best presenters, somebody who I always enjoy the opportunity to learn from, someone who's been with the Jefferson team since our founding chairwoman of our board of trustees, but somebody who's been with us for a long time and now is a scholar in residence. Prior, a 5-term county executive for Erie County, also taught at several other institutions throughout the region, including Allegheny College and Mercyhurst University. So without further ado, you watching at home, please join me in giving a warm Jefferson welcome to Dr. Judy Lynch.
Well, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen in the viewing audience, it's my delight to be here. And I just want to say that this looks like the NBA. I haven't seen any of the players. So Ben introduced me as the guinea pig, but that kind of sent a little qualm through me because you know what happens to guinea pigs in Peru? They eat them.
Oh,
So this particular production, this particular subject is of great importance to the residents of the county of Erie. Other than that, I would not be here. Let me just kind of give an introduction to how all of this started. About 2 years ago, with the insistence or the help of Ferky Ferrati, our president, and Ben Spega and Angela, we went to Kathy Dahlkemper and to Fiore Leone in the county and asked that they consider doing a book on Erie County government that would be at least somewhat similar to the book that the Jefferson published on the mayors of the city of Erie. Now, this is the work that has been done, but there's so much more that is still to be done. I want to show you some of the things that I've been working on most recently. This is the research. This is the research that I have done for the Erie County Sheriff's Department, and that particular chapter is pretty much done. I am also working on a chapter of the judges of Erie County, and this is the research that has been completed for that particular chapter. Now, as many of you know, that Jefferson has already published some of the happenings in the early part of the county commissioners, and that would be from 1800 to about 1900, when they struggled with a lot of issues, and it was, of course, very significant because the political structure was continuously changing. And so I urge you, if you have not received, or if you do not have a copy of that particular chapter, that it's available through the Jefferson. I am, as I said before, delighted to be here, and the reason why is not because I like performing, which again, I don't want to be the guinea pig, but I really feel that this topic is of considerable importance to Erie County, and even to people who would be in Crawford County or Warren County, because there are so many similarities there. So with that, I'm going to turn to the PowerPoint and direct your attention to this PowerPoint. And, Eric. This is, of course, the first slide of our PowerPoint, and it is critical just to kind of give this a look and to clearly come to an understanding of the content that is in this particular slide. Now, it says the county's responsibility for the poor. We are talking about Erie County government. And remember, this study was commissioned by the county executive, Kathy Dahlkemper, and the then chairman of county council, Fiore Leone. So we're looking at the county's responsibility for the poor, and how was it that counties throughout the state of Pennsylvania were given a kind of the burden, if you will, of caring for the poor in their jurisdiction. Now, in doing this, counties plus their partners in the state and in the federal government took a multitude of different directions in dealing with an issue that seemed as if it was not really resolvable. As much as they tried to do in a certain time in a period with a certain type of policy, there was never ever a point when it was seen that they had really accomplished the purpose of taking care of the poor, or reducing the number of poor, or eliminating the poor. And so the slide that we have here shows something about the policy that was followed. And as you can see, this is not a car that you would like to travel in, because the car is going this way, then it's going that way, and it's going that way, it turns around, starts again, goes all over the road, and it probably, in the end, does not have a very successful journey at all. Now, if we wanted to turn this kind of picture, this representation, into the policy that was actually followed by the county of Erie, this would be what it would be. The first thing that the counties, not only Erie, but across Pennsylvania, were instructed to do was to offer outdoor relief. And outdoor relief was when you fixed the potholes, or you pulled the stumps that were in the road, or you cleared the roads of debris, whatever outdoor relief was available, and you would be paid something for that. Now, that obviously didn't work, and so some, and in Erie County it was true, turned to shaming. And those who were poor then were identified in the community, and then when you were identified, you were labeled as poor, and it was a kind of a status that was a very unwelcome one for the poor. This is probably becomes the most important part of the way counties took care of the poor, and that is through almshouses. And later on, we will be talking about the Erie County Almshouse. In addition to that, we know that during the 1900s, early 1900s, there was an impetus to get children who were without care, and to get those who would be considered mentally unable to take care of themselves, or the poorest of the poor, or maybe the elderly who had dementia, out of their homes, out of their neighborhoods, and institutions. But institutions did not remain as the panacea. What then people began to turn to say, what we need is something that is more based in the community, and so we have community-based services. And the final outcome is that counties or states or the federal government really have tried numerous ways in which to handle the poor of their particular municipality or location, and have never been really totally effective. So what I'm going to do is turn to the next slide, which I think is important because all teachers do this. The one thing that they want to do is they want to define terms. What do we mean by the poor? And so this is a kind of indication of those individuals that we would kind of lump into that category. And these would be, well, children without caregivers. And even though this would come as quite a surprise, that certainly was endemic in the state of Pennsylvania, that there were many children. We'll talk about how that came to be, but children who had no parents or no caretakers. The severely physically handicapped, those with significant debilitating mental illness, those with alcohol and drug addictions, and the elderly unable to take care for themselves. Now I want to just kind of remind you of something that we all know, and I wish that this presentation could be upbeat and happy, particularly in this time when we are facing so much crisis. But just recently, Joe Schember, the mayor of the city of Erie, announced that within the city of Erie, there were approximately 1,000 homeless individuals on the street. Now, right at this time, because we have the 2020 census coming upon us, we are going to be counting the homeless. And it'll be interesting when we get a precise number for the homeless. Here is why, in my opinion, the poor have always been a part of our communities, our states, and our nation. And that is, we were the asylum. So I'm going to direct your attention to a book that I thought might be helpful to give anybody who would be interested in having a deeper look at where the people of Pennsylvania actually came from and who they were, and to maybe obtain this book. It can be obtained in the library, or you can go online and buy it. It is by Marilyn C. Bassler, and it's called Asylum for Mankind. And when they say asylum for mankind, the asylum was the United States. So, this is what happened in the United States, of course. We know that Great Britain was the nation of Europe that was able to cement its kind of control on the northeastern part of the United States, establish colonies, and one of those colonies, of course, was what we would call the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It was called the proprietary state at that time. It was under the direction of the William Penn family. But here you have what how it was organized, because here were thousands of acres, and how was it that William Penn and his descendants, because there were about 5 descendants that became the proprietors of Pennsylvania, how were they able then to mobilize and to organize the colony of Pennsylvania? Well, what they did, of course, was borrow the fabric and the way in which the English society was working at that time. And basic to the English society was the Duke of York's laws. And what we're talking about is about 1640, and these laws then were borrowed and they were transferred to the state of Pennsylvania or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania during the proprietary period by the Penn family. And so in 1706, Pennsylvania adopted a first General Poor Relief Act. I might state that previous to the Duke of York laws, taking care of the poor certainly recognized as a very important part of what kept society together, became an ecclesiastical responsibility. But it was in the 1600s, through people like William Penn, that they adopted this responsibility on the part of the government. The government at this time was a proprietary state, and it was the Duke of York's laws. And so this is the first act passed in Pennsylvania, and what it did is adopted a relief act which required appointed justices. Now, justices would be another word for judges of each county, to select 2 overseers of the poor. These are people who are responsible for knowing who the poor were, where they were, how to access them, and how to get them relief. Now, the overseers of the poor were based in the counties, and that would be the county of Erie, and sometimes, depending on the organization of the county, particularly in like a county like York that's close to the origins of the beginning of Pennsylvania, it could be based in a township. But for the most part, the initial overseers of the poor were based in the county. And so it becomes a county responsibility for the poor. And then what happens is something I think that is so extraordinary because people don't realize that this COVID-19 catastrophe that we are going through right now is not something new to human society. Human society has gone through it before, and it was in the 1600s and the 1700s that this sort of thing was happening in Britain and in Europe. And it was called the Little Ice Age, and it was when there was so much climatic change and so much rain, so much ice was forming, other things that affected the growth of crops. And there were many people, of course, that were driven from the farms into the city, had no wherewithal to survive, and their children were in the streets. So this is the 1600s and the 1700s. And so what was happening at the same time, congruent to this situation that was happening particularly in Britain, was that exploration was occurring and the colonies were established. So what better way to cure your problem of the homeless and the poor would be to round them up and to send them overseas. And of course they were exported to all of the colonies, but we've got to understand that one of these colonies was Pennsylvania, and actually thousands and hundreds of thousands of people were exported. Now, those people did not come with money, they did not come with resources, they did not come with education, they did not come with any type of skills that would sustain their living for the most part. One of the other things that was happening at the same time was enclosure, and many of the viewing public wouldn't understand what I meant by enclosure, but Britain, just as the United States would if it were back at that time, and just as the United States is struggling to contain and to deal with the COVID-19 virus, Britain was doing the same thing at this point in time. And so what they wanted to do with all of the common land that was part of Britain, they wanted to divvy that up and make it into farming areas and to increase the production because people were actually dying of famine. And so increased agricultural production became absolutely essential, and enclosure was one of the ways in which to solve it. So this is enclosure for harvest and a breakdown and distribution of food. It caused all of this chaos in Britain, where you really have thousands of people homeless and in need of care. So this is the population growth of England, and that's what's happening at the same time that these calamities, this is the 1600s and the 1700s, at the same time these calamities were happening, and really there were millions of people that died of famine, at the same time the population of England was increasing exponentially, and you can see that. This is a picture that we are used to seeing if we pick up a book on Dickens, and it's a picture of the city of London where you have masses of people kind of in the street, people who are bedraggled and are begging for their sustenance. So please note that this is the beginning of Pennsylvania then. So the question is who are the early settlers? Who are the early settlers of Pennsylvania? Well, in Pennsylvania, we know that we were quite different to some extent. Not totally, but just to some extent, because we were the Quaker haven. Because William Penn was a Quaker, he was a leader of the Quakers, and with him came to Pennsylvania a lot of the Quakers. In addition, we also know that throughout Europe and even in Scotland and other areas, there were many dissidents who did not fit into the kind of decorum and way in which the British believed people should exist. They were not Episcopalians, they were Presbyterians. They did not have the same beliefs or practice the same way that most of the British did. So you had the dissenters, you had the Puritans and the Quakers. But this latter part, this is the one that I think that we should be most conscious of. And this is the outcasts that came into Pennsylvania and to the other colonies of the New World. And these were the felons, people who were rounded up because they had been caught stealing, or that they had had some other incident that made them outside of the law. And here were the poor. Now, this is what I'd like to point out, the Irish. Because we are close to St. Patrick's Day, and of course my name is Judith Lynch, but it's Judith Maloney Lynch. And so the Irish are really very important. And by this time, when we're talking about the 1600s and the 1700s, we know what was happening in Ireland. That the British had moved in, they had pushed the Irish landlords off of their land, they had created calamities. There was famine, there was disease, there was rampant problems in Ireland. And Britain went in and rounded up the Irish and with the Scots, and then transported them to the New World. Because remember, Britain did not want them. They did not want them in their country, the Irish and the Scots, okay? And they did not want the poor and the felons, and they didn't want the Puritans and the Quakers in the country of Britain. And so these were outcasts. These were people that were rounded up and then dumped into the New World. And I have my daughter here, my granddaughter here, They both work in Homeland Security. They could stand up and be recognized if they would, okay?
Where are you?
So, part of Homeland Security deals, and particularly Aaron's job, deals with immigrants. And how do you care for immigrants? And there, I think we can be proud of our conscious desire to integrate immigrants into our society. However, that was not the case here in the New World in the 1600s and the 1700s. People were dumped on the shores, and it was up to them, really, to survive and to make their way. And so, this is now going back to how can you handle this really voluminous number of people who are poor, that are in a strange world, that do not have the skills to sustain themselves, and how do you handle the situation? And hopefully all of us as humans have some sort of feeling for others. And so one of the ways, the early ways that in the colonies that they dealt with the poor was through shaming. And this is not something that we should walk away from, because we do it today. And maybe we're not conscious of it all of the time, but this does happen. But in this particular period of time, it was much more overt. And what they did is they made people who were homeless, poor, who were unable to sustain themselves, wear a P on their clothing, a bright red P. And that would indicate that they were a pauper or that they were poor. And so it was just shaming. Nobody wanted to be placed in that category. And many probably who were in the government at that time thought that the shame would be sufficient in order to prompt people to go out and get a job, to do the things that were necessary in order to survive and to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Okay? So this is the book that I mentioned, and this is a quote from the book, and it states, "Despite the fact that British North America was a death trap rather than a land of opportunity." Okay? So those who refuse to take care of themselves, they could be denied relief. So, yep, we have relief possible for the poor, but if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't go out and do the outdoor relief, that is, help to remove the stumps and clear the roads and pick up anything that needed to be done, then you could be sent to the jail and you would be forced to do hard labor. So this was a practice then that was initially tried in the early colonial period. Now, this is another poor law that is passed, and this is 1722. And this involved the county commissioners. So by that time, county commissioners initially they were appointed, but eventually they were elected, and they became the local administrative agency for Pennsylvania. Because remember, we're talking about a time when there were no buses or cars, roads were just hardly discernible, it would be more paths, it would be, the communication would be just absolutely abhorrent. So a community that was based in Philadelphia, as the early government was in Pennsylvania, would need to have administrative capability in order to administer poor relief. And so who did they choose? County commissioners were first appointed and then elected, and they became the administrators for the state of Pennsylvania, responsible for the poor. So here's the poor law of 1771. Here's again the county commissioners. Now what was the kind of work that was expected? It was road work, stump removal, debris clearance, and these were the things that the counties were authorized to give poor relief, to people who were unable to sustain themselves or take care of themselves. If they worked out there in the roads, if they worked in the community, then they were eligible for relief. The picture here I think is really important, not because it is very clear, which it is not, and I understand that, but we have all walked in the woods, we have all seen these paths that are sometimes pockmarked with stones and roots and holes and boulders and those sort of things. Those were truly the roads. Those were the roads of this particular time. Now, this is where the counties then become a little bit more organized, and they say, okay, we've got all of these poor. Poor relief is not sufficient. This is not taking care of the problem. We have elderly, we have children, we have people who are mentally unstable. We have all sorts of problems. We need to take care of it, or these people will die. They will die in the streets. They will die wherever they are. So the early counties in the state of Pennsylvania began to establish almshouses. Now, almshouses, not a new thing for Great Britain, but a new thing for Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They were initially called poor farms, and that designation really indicates what their construction and what their the work that these areas did for the poor, because they controlled acreage, and on the acreage then, those who were in the almshouses were expected to work as farm laborers, to produce their own crops, to sustain themselves through the almshouses. And the almshouses also not only housed people who were physically able to do this work, but there were many people who were unable to do the work. And these were people who were sick. These were young. They could be babies. They could be young children, a little bit older children, aged and poor, the insane. These were all housed at the almshouse. And initially, the design for the almshouse is that it would be self-supporting. Well, we've solved the problem of the poor. We've got the almshouse, it is a farm, people are living collectively, they have a roof over their heads, they have something to do, they have a way to maintain themselves, but the difficulty is that many of the people who were in the almshouse were physically unable to work. Now, those that were able were pressed into work. They raised vegetables and crops and chickens. Now, this is for Erie County, and that is, Erie County never had an almshouse until 1840. Many of the counties that were to the east of us certainly did, but Erie's almshouse came about in 1840. This is the picture of the almshouse in York. Now, this is, of course, Erie becoming organized and becoming a little bit more populated, and so by 1840, Erie County votes. It votes for an almshouse, and it's authorized to elect directors of the poor. And directors of the poor are people who become responsible for the almshouse, and the almshouse is the principal way that the county takes care of the poor. Now, why did the county have responsibility for the poor? And that's because the state had given its responsibility. It had passed that responsibility on to the county, and the county had determined that the way to actually carry that out was through an almshouse. And so what you have here is the state managed to care for the poor. By 1839, the voters of Erie County, who had initially turned down the construction of an almshouse, by 1840 they said, nope, we need one. And in 1840, the state required the directors of the poor to be elected in Erie County. Rather than to be appointed now, the directors of the poor would become elected officials and responsible to the people of Erie County. Now, who was it that was to bear the cost, if there was any cost, to this almshouse? And that would be the people of the county of Erie, or the counties of Pennsylvania. So, this is Erie County, obtained its first complement of directors of the poor after 1840, and there was a successful referendum, and Erie County was recognized as a single district, a district for the poor by the state of Pennsylvania. So there are always people that are very instrumental in achievement. When things happen, they don't happen usually because there is a herd, there's a group. It's usually an individual who's taken some leadership, pulls people along with them. And one of the persons in Erie County's history that was very important was John Walker. And he was a member of the General Assembly. In 1832, he sponsored an act obtaining 2,000 acres of state land in Milk Creek Township. And most people don't realize that this almshouse was actually constructed in Milk Creek Township. The land for the almshouse was 2,000 acres, and then there were 3 commissioners that were appointed by the county. These commissioners are names that are, if you are a student of history of Erie County, they're relatively well known: William Miles, George Moore, and David McNair. This is the first almshouse, and of course it no longer exists. I think it is quite a stately building. As you can see, it has 3 turrets. It was located at 23rd and Pittsburgh Avenue. This is how many stories it had. It had 4 stories. It was constructed of brick, and it was built to accommodate about 270 poor. And there were both sexes, and the poor also encompassed children, both men and women also. It was opened in 1841. What did it cost? I can't believe this. This is historical record. This is what they say in the history books, that it cost $1,065, and that was levied in taxes. Now, the directors of the poor became elected officials. By 1840, they were elected officials. They were responsible for managing the poor farm, because this was not just an establishment. It was not just bricks and mortar, but it was actually the place where the poor were housed, but they were expected to go out to the acreage that was contained on the poor farm and to farm it. So this is in 1840, 3 directors of the poor were elected, and the directors had the responsibility for administering. And one of the things to know is that the only evidence of this building that we have today is the pauper's grave. The pauper's grave that is out by out by Fairview, but it was a grave that contained the remains of those who died. Now, initially, who were the people? The first people included 2 single men, 1 blind woman, and 1 mother with 4 children. So it gives you an indication of who it was. Now, the electors of the poor. These were directors of the poor. They were elected, and this gives you an idea of their term of office, who they were, and where they came from, and you can see the various places in Erie County from which they came. And this goes up to 1892, and so this is now, remember the first slide, and I doubt if that's the memory that's in anybody's mind, but that was a car that went this way and it went that way, and we're going to solve a problem. We're going to go in this direction. No, we're going to back up. We'll go in this direction. This is the policy for caring for the poor. We never know exactly what's going to work. We always are off traveling. We think we've got an answer, and it doesn't prove to be sufficient or that fruitful, so we back up and try something else. And so this is a big change, another change that was happening, and this was increasing expenses of the poorhouse. And as you can see, in 1860, you have 7,000, that was the cost, to $7,600, the cost to the county, okay? By 1890, 33,000. Pretty big increase now. This is, of course, one of the things that you always have to be careful in any political environment, because do the political officials that are handling the relief for the poor, do they have a commercial interest or a private interest? And so here's a law forbidding directors of the poor to have any self-interest in any contract. So then in 1879, the state gave directors authority to withdraw relief from anyone refusing to go to the almshouse. So now, if you were without any type of economic resources, you had no place to stay, you were out on the streets, you were rounded up and you were taken to the poorhouse or the almshouse. Now, the almshouses continued into the 1960s, okay? Into the 19th century, excuse me, and the picture that we have up here is one that is well known to almost anybody who studies social history in the United States. Her name is Dorothea Dix, and she fought for the removal of children and the mentally ill and other special populations like developmentally disabled persons from the almshouses. And she became successful in that. Here again is her picture, Dorothea Dix, and she was an advocate on behalf of the indigent, but particularly the mentally ill. So now what it is that, hey, Pennsylvania, hey, all of you who are making changes in our social policy, let's look and see, how do we take care of the mentally ill? How do we take care of children? Should they be included in the almshouses? And what horrific problems had occurred that would point to the fact that almshouses were not the proper places for children, or maybe not the proper places for the mentally ill. So this is during the Civil War, Dorothea Dix, and Dorothea Dix served as the superintendent of Army nurses, and she was the one that helped to establish Warren State Hospital. And of course, Warren is still in existence, barely. It is one that is probably slated to be closed by the state of Pennsylvania. But this was a change. Remember that car that goes this way and that way and backs up, and how do we take care of the poor, and who are the poor, and what can we do? And so this was one of those times which the car changed directions, and what we did was we identified certain populations of the poor, and these were, of course, the mentally ill and special populations that would be cared in a mental hospital. Okay, now, so the state creates Warren State Hospital for the treatment of the insane in northwestern Pennsylvania, and that happened in 1873, Warren State Hospital. That, of course, is not in Erie County, but Erie County became a participant in Warren State Hospital. And in 1880 it opened. This is initially what it looked like. And the mail-in saved from Mill Creek Almshouse, Mill Creek Almshouse being the form, were transferred to Warren State Hospital. So here is the state creates Polk Center. And Polk is a little bit more familiar to all of us, and it is slated to be closed because remember that car that goes in this direction and it backs up, goes this, and how do we take care of the poor? We don't know, and we're trying this way or that way. Well, this is the situation which occurred in the 1880s, and it was believed that a special institution, Polk, that could care for children ages 2 to 15 in a special environment would be the most conducive to successfully kind of immersing them into the general culture. So it took children who were epileptic, paralytic, unteachable, and deformed. And so this is the kind of history of Polk Center. and this is what has been happening. The state permits the directors of the poor to enter contract with institutions for care of persons with hearing impairment and blindness. So the kind of constituency that eventually inhabits Polk changes over time, but the purpose is pretty much the same. And this is then in the Charity Society that is established in Erie in 1881, and the persons who are part of this, who are really the beginning and they are the instrument, are W.L. Scott, J.F. Downing, W.S. Brown. These are well known in terms of Erie history. And the purpose was to coordinate care provided by the poor district. So now we have the establishment of a poor district, which was encompasses Erie County. What was their mission? To promote the welfare of the poor through education, self-reliance, that sort of thing. Now, these are philanthropic organizations that is outside the government, outside of the state of Pennsylvania. These are private institutions, many of them based in religious orders, and they take on the responsibility for the poor. And these are some of the places which are established by them. Some are part of the government, like St. Joseph's Home for Children was part of the Sisters of St. Joseph, St. Mary's Home for the Aged, Salvation Army Home, Sarah Reed Home. These were all special private organizations that were chartered, and their purpose was to care for the poor in Erie County. So, this is what happened then at the turn of the century, of the 20th century. The old Almshouse, which was built in Mill Creek, and which people don't remember, okay, was torn down, and because it was insufficient, and because the land itself at that area was not thought of as being highly productive. And since the purpose of the poor farm was to raise all of the products needed for the people at the almshouse, then what they needed was very productive land. And so they chose land in the Fairview area. And this is the new construction that occurred. Erie County was very instrumental in building this. And this is in Girard, close to Fairview. And from 1923 to 33, the disbursement for poor relief doubled. And while the almshouse expenditures remained about the same per patient, there were more people who needed care. And so more poor people, as the population of Erie County grew, and as the population of the United States grew, and as it grew statewide, then there were more poor. And so you needed larger resources, and this was to increase the resources that would be available. What did the construction cost? About $700,000. Not much in our terms. And the building was the largest project that had been ever undertaken by the county of Erie. It was designed to be self-sustaining. And what does that mean? That meant that the people who were resided here at this almshouse would be in charge of farming, gathering produce, taking care of animals, doing all the things necessary to raise all of the products necessary for them to survive. And that was the principle. It was designed to be self-sustaining. So, now we get into the 1900s, and one of the problems, of course, by this time, Pennsylvania, along with all of the other states, but Pennsylvania, divided into counties, and the counties responsible for the care of the poor, and they were really facing just tremendous escalating costs because the almshouses were never sufficient to raise the amount of products necessary for the people that resided there. So by 1900, by the beginning of the 20th century, almshouse expenditures had become the largest single county expense. And you can just see the disbursements for poor relief doubled between 1923 and 1933. And who was picking up most of the cost? It was a county responsibility, but because the counties were unable to raise that significant amount of money, much of the burden fell on the state. And much of the things that the county does are a combination. They're paid for through money from the state and money from the county, and that was the case here, but the state's costs were increasing exponentially. So the Department of Welfare required all purchase of land. It's trying to control what was happening on these poor farms. And so all purchase of land, buildings had to be approved by the Department of Public Welfare. Now, in 1933, 79.5% of poor relief funds were coming from the state or the federal government. So initially, it was a county responsibility. But because the county was unable to raise or unwilling to raise the amount of money necessary, the burden fell again on the state and the federal government. So here is, of course, the Great Depression. We thought that we had a problem in the 20s, but it was nothing compared to the problem in the 30s. This is the person who became governor, Gifford Pinchot. He became very friendly with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Pinchot was a Republican, Roosevelt a Democrat, but they worked together. And these were the acts that were passed during the early part of the Depression, 1931, and they're allocating money for the welfare of county poor districts. So every county was considered a poor district. Some of the smaller counties in Pennsylvania were merged into multiple county poor districts. But the county of Erie was its own poor district. It had directors of the poor, and it collected funds that were never could be given directly to the poor. The funds were used to pay for the poor farm or the Erie County home. And so this is the second Talbot Act. It allocated more money for the care of the poor, but you can see what is happening during the Depression, that the needs are outgrowing the government's ability to keep up with them. And it's struggling to keep up with the increase in the number of the poor and to meet their needs. Now, one of the other things that Pinchot is well known for, and that is Pennsylvania, even if you look today, it has many roads that are still unpaved. But at this period of time, during the Depression, it was an aim of the state of Pennsylvania to pave the roads, and who was going to do the work for that would be the poor in the poor houses. And so the state took over about 20,000 miles of roads. This is from the townships largely, and they used the unemployed and the poor to pave the roads. So now, this is another governor of the state of Pennsylvania. His name was George H. Earl, and this is the establishment of the county institutional district. And when did it happen? 1937, and at the end, not truly the end of the Depression, but towards that period of time, and the institutional district attempted to kind of bring order to the distribution of help and assistance to the poor. And so every county became an institutional district. And then the county commissioners became the directors of an institution district board. And so the counties were required to levy a poor tax, and the prime responsibility was the maintenance of the county almshouses. So yes, the poor tax was levied, and where did that tax go? It went to the Alms House, which is located just right on the border between Girard and Fairview. Now, this is the Public Assistance Law of 1937. It created the first Department of Public Assistance, and there were uniform measures that were adopted for the administration of relief. And here are the county boards of assistance. In every county, there was a structure, and there were 7 persons that were appointed by the governor. They were appointed for a 3-year term, and what was required by the legislation is there be both Republicans and Democrats on that board, and that they served without pay, and their responsibility was to make the decisions to take care of the poor through these various instruments. So this is the county institutional district law, and again, alms houses became regulated by the state. And as you can see, what is happening is that initially, you know, the poor, the responsibility was given to the counties, but the counties were overwhelmed by the Depression with this responsibility. The state is picking up more and more of what the costs are, and here is an indication of that when the state creates the county institution district law, and it begins to regulate, step in, and look at the alms houses and make sure that they are doing what they should be doing. And this is about bond issues, and of course we're familiar with that, but bond issues could only be issued for certain purposes. They were tightly regulated, and state law continued to indicate that the chief duty of the institution district officers, who were the county commissioners, they were the county commissioners. Their primary responsibility was to care for the dependent, for the poor. So this was clearly on the part of the state an attempt to assure that the counties did not step aside and give the total responsibility for care of the poor to the state. Now, this is Polk. It is established in 1897, and it takes special populations. So by this time, there is an intellectual movement saying that, yes, we have a lot of poor, and among the poor, there are these people who are mentally disabled, and there are some people physically disabled. We need to differentiate. We need to kind of spell out what types of problems that we have in this cohort and deal with them separately. And so this is an attempt to do that. And this legislation lifted Erie County's responsibility for Erie County residents who were hospitalized in Warden State Hospital in Polk Center. Okay? So this is now Erie County Tuberculosis Hospital. So, hey, if it wasn't enough to have problems with the growing numbers of poor, particularly in the Depression, people completely unable to take care of themselves and their families, this was an epidemic of proportions that was really significant and affected the entire population, and that is the growth of tuberculosis. So how are we going to take care of this disease that was extremely contagious? And the way in which counties throughout Pennsylvania were doing that was to create hospitals for tuberculosis. And this is our particular one, Erie County Tuberculosis Hospital. And the seal, of course, is something well known. People were asked to donate to stamp out tuberculosis. And this is a little bit about that. In 1938, Erie County opened up a 65-bed tuberculosis hospital. And I think everybody knows that it was opened up in Mill Creek. Erie County Society for Prevention of Tuberculosis was kind of the leading charger in establishing this particular facility. this is a woman I think we should all give tribute to. Her name was Katherine Hwa. She was a doctor. She was one of the first female doctors in Erie County. She was the daughter of Stephen and Ella Hwa, and these are, of course, people who are relatively famous historically. Samuel Hayes, the Burgess of Erie, she was related to them. And this is a little bit about her history. But she returned to Erie after having gone to the Women's Medical College and graduated with an MD in 1904. She returns to Erie and she begins to gather together and to work with those that are extremely concerned about the epidemic of tuberculosis. And this is, of course, Spanish flu was also happening at this particular time. So Katherine Hwa served as the chair of the Erie County Tuberculosis Hospital. Who supervised this hospital, who was responsible for this hospital, was the County of Erie. And this is what it looked like. It is still in existence. It is closed down. It is probably slotted for it's going to be torn down. So, but it initially opened in 1938 with a great need in the community because tuberculosis was something that was epidemic in proportion. And here is a little bit more about the tuberculosis hospital, and this is how eventually the tuberculosis became something that could be handled and could be dealt with, and was not a disease that would be, usually end in death. So by the 1940s, tuberculosis was a health problem. With 46, with the creation of streptomycin, when it became available, then tuberculosis became a disease that could be handled. And so these are the important dates of this tuberculosis hospital. And we know today that it is closed and it will probably be torn down, but it has served its purpose, still owned by the County of Erie. And this is, of course, changes now in medical procedure and medical care. And this came in 1965, and this is the adoption of Medicare and Medicaid. You have President Truman here sitting with Lyndon Johnson, and of course they are signing these two bills into law, probably the most consequential medical legislation in the history of the United States. And then this is a little bit more about the 60s and 70s and what happened in the 60s and 70s. We thought we knew a better way. We thought that the 60s and the 70s were certainly better than the 20s and the 30s, that we had so much better understanding of disease. And so what was adopted then was deinstitutionalization. And that is, let's bring the people home from Polk. Let's take all of the people out of the sanitariums, take them and treat them in the community. They will be better off, their families will be closer to them, and we will have a better health situation, and we will have a better situation for them. And so this is a little bit more about what was happening. Now, along with the deinstitutionalization came improvement in medicines that were available, like antipsychotic medicine. We had a foster parent program that was initiated and developed. We had work release, we had assisted housing, we had all of the things that were necessary to care for these people that had been institutionalized. So these are the community-based programs. And of course, here is Dr. Dr. Barber, and she, of course, is being examined by Rome to see whether she will meet all of the requirements for sainthood, which I would think would be something that will be accomplished in the future. And this is the Barber Center. So I'm using that as an example of how treatment at home, taking children who might have been previously hospitalized and then treating them in a home-based institution so that they would be close to their family. And these pictures kind of give you an idea of how the Gertrude Barber Center grew and grew and grew and grew through the programs that were instituted by the state of Pennsylvania to take care of the mentally retarded, to take care of children who were challenged and had specific problems. And so this was the treatment at home. And then, so this is community-based programs, and this is something we can all feel good about, we can get behind, okay? Maybe, okay? So another example would be stairways. This is a mention of, this is the mission of Stairways Behavioral Health. We can be proud of this particular organization because it's cared for the many people in the community that have mental illness. But there were problems, okay? Now, these were community-based programs, and so this is an example of one, Erie Homes for Children and Adults. And instead of sending children or adults that were having particular problems to institutions, let's keep them at home, or let's have them in home-based programs. And so this is one of those. And here we have another apparatus that was put together because you had the county of Erie. It had a very strong mental health program, a mental retardation program. It had to keep track of all of the children and adults that were part of its program. And how did it do that? It did it through case management. And so this is, again, a little bit of an example of how complicated and compounded the programs, social service programs, came for the treatment of the mentally ill, mentally handicapped. And this is a consequence of community-based care. 44 states and DC, there are more people locked up with serious mental illness than any state psychiatric hospital. So remember that car, and remember the first slide, when we're going here, we're going there, we're backing up, we're going this way, we're going that way, we think we have an answer, it's going this way, we have this answer, no, I think we better go this way, no, let's back up. This is what has happened with the treatment of the poor, and many of the poor being either mentally ill, and physically handicapped, completely unable to take care of themselves, maybe they're aged, maybe their children. So according to a report of the Treatment Advocacy Center, American prisons and jails house so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of inmates who are seriously mentally ill. And of course, I would assume that the few people in this room, okay, and all of the viewing public know that we should not be treating those people in this manner. They should not be, our jails should not be our mental institutions. Okay, now, these are some problems with foster care. We think that foster care is a tremendously vital program, which it has been. We have a child now that is pushed out of a family, or maybe their parents unable to take care of them, or maybe they have died. And so who is taking care of this child? They become part of the foster care program, and now what we have is this is the percentage of children who are in foster care. Girls in foster care who are pregnant by 50%. Former foster kids in U.S. prisons, 74%. Incarcerated within 2 years, 50%. Former foster youth on the death row, 80%. This is a calamity. This says something about a foster care program, and yet the question is what do we do with children and maybe young adults, who do not have the capability of functioning independently in our communities, and they have no families, then how do we care for them? And so this is something we're confronting today. We know that this is in the offing, that the state of Pennsylvania has already decided to close our institutions. Many of those institutions are located in northwestern Pennsylvania. One of them is Polk Center. And Polk, of course, have taken care of dysfunctional children for years and years. The state announced its intention to close Polk within 3 years. And of course, they have moved people out. They've moved people out of Polk into the counties, into any type of situation that seems to be available. And there are only 194 current residents that are based in Polk. And within a short period of time, Polk Center will be closed and perhaps torn down. This is a little bit more about poverty, because this is something that people in Erie County are used to seeing. All you have to do is go out in the streets of the city of Erie, and you see the poor who are among us. They have not vanished. Remember, most of the people early who came to the United States, who were pushed into the United States in a sense, certainly were poor. And that continues to be the situation in many of our cities. And it would be interesting to know exactly how many poor we have. At least 1,000 in the city of Erie. So what assistance do they have? Well, we're very fortunate in this community to have a lot of religious organizations, other organizations that sponsor certain activities that help to assist the poor. Now, this is JCAC Meal on Wheels. We're very familiar with that. Many of the religious orders will have an outreach to the poor. We know, like Martin Luther King Center, Food Bank. We know the Salvation Army is there. It has a food bank. We have all sorts of elements, Meals on Wheels, some things to get food to the poor. All you have to do is go and walk the streets of Erie, and it will be very evident to you that we have at least 1,000 people who are extraordinarily poor, who do not have homes, that are living in the streets of the city of Erie. Now, this is other things that have been done in order to care for the poor, because we know that the poor not only need subsistence, they need food, but they also need health care. And so Medicaid, which is a federal program, offers assistance to the poor, and there is county assistance. So this is a little bit about that. So, but what I think is most essential for our viewing audience to look at is this table, which shows the cost to the county of Erie of taking care of the poor. Now, if we concentrate just on the county of Erie human service budget for children and youth, how much? $9,920,000. All right, that's the county's cost. But look at the state's cost, $44 million. For mental health and intellectual disabilities assistance, for the county, over $1 million. For the state, close to $30 million. The total, $28 million and more. Drug and alcohol, health choices, you can see that. So this is significant, because when we started out, we had people who came not on their own choice, but were pushed out of Europe, largely out of Britain or places that Britain controlled, brought to the United States and struggled in order to survive in this country. And by this time, this is what it is costing the county of Erie. Now, this is just Pleasant Ridge Manor. The county of Erie and the state of Pennsylvania have a combined responsibility, financial responsibility for Pleasant Ridge Manor. And you can see here, this is for Medicaid, this is state, largely, but about 50% state, 50% federal, and this is how much the county is giving, over $1 million to Pleasant Ridge in order to supplement what the state gives and the federal government gives in order to make it a viable institution and to take care of the poor. So, this is where we are. Remember that road, and we had this vehicle that went this way and that way. We have a problem, we don't know how to take care. We think we know, we'll go this way. Nope, that didn't work, we'll go this way, we'll back up, we'll go this way. Take care of the problem, this is gonna help, this is gonna take. And we still end up with this type of cost and with the number of poor in Erie County increasing exponentially because of our economy and because of the situation, that is happening. Okay? Now, this is a kind of dichotomy. It's how you might feel about the poor. You could say, okay, the county remains a significant partner, okay? But I don't care about poor people. I don't want to pay for poor people. I don't want to take care of poor people. This is not my responsibility. This is not the state. I'm not paying my taxes to take care of poor people. But I think this is what's most important. And I really think that, again, we need to take this and think about it and take it to heart. And that if you refuse to listen to the cry of the poor, your own cry, because we never know. We never know what economic situations will confront us, okay? Your own cry for help will not be heard. And so that's kind of the end of my presentation. But as you can see, it is a conundrum. We have not found our way. We don't know what the solution is, but we cannot keep from trying. We must keep on trying.
Angela, questions from Facebook?
There's one question that I have. So Judy, if you think back to the Almshouses, and you mentioned they were sustainable and they were mostly working like farm workers, would you think they would have been more successful if they had invested in small scale manufacturing and trade?
I think that's a very good comment. And one of the things, Angela, I'm just going to identify you because you're from Germany. And Germany, I think, would say that you've got to have a multidimensional effort when you look at a problem that is so difficult to define and so, and so broad and so wide. So it would be probably much better, rather than to raise your own crops and to take care of people in that way, to have some sort of a manufacturing concern that would then sell products in the market and take that money and distribute it to the workers. But that may be a little bit more difficult, number one. And number two, it might compete with real industry, and therefore you would have a pushback.
Thank you.
Thank everybody for coming from the microphone so they can hear me. Everybody watching at home. So I just want to take a really quick moment to thank Dr. Judy Lynch for being the first digital program that we're offering here at the Jefferson. Big thanks to all of you who are watching along at home. We're going to save this video. It's going to be available on the Jefferson Facebook page. We're going to upload the presentation as soon as we can, so that'll also be available to you. You can leave questions, comments in the section on this post. We'll get them to Dr. Judy Lynch and try to get answers back to you. Friendly reminder, back here Friday, March 13th, for a community conversation on the coronavirus, COVID-19, with folks from the County Health Department, as well as medical professionals from LECOM, the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine. A big thanks for all of you joining us across the globe digitally. We thank you for being a part of tonight's program and look forward to doing this again in the future. Thank you. I hugged you, but we're told not to do any of that
Yeah,
stuff. That
oh,
was
this
great.
This is what
You
State
were
Department does
awesome.
is
No,
virtual.
I always say that, and I'm always disappointed.
No, that's